Okay, I think we are preparing to go live here. And I think
We are
we're
live.
live now. Yeah.
Woo. I saw it pop up. There it is. There we are. Hello.
So we are ready whenever you are, Christina, to kick
We
things
are
off.
live.
Cool. I'd like to wait a minute in honor of all my people who are late, like I usually am.
They are, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
Represent.
Wow.
Um.
Ooh, Dave, what are you eating there, brother?
Chinese.
We actually had some Vietnamese ourselves today for the first time. Since,
I haven't had any Chinese in
Oh my god.
4 months.
Oh boy.
I haven't had any in like 7 days. Mel and I clearly have different priorities.
I like my Chinese places. I just don't trust them currently. So.
Gotcha.
There are Chinese people in America. They don't import the ingredients from China.
I don't trust their cleaning processes. It has nothing to do with their ethnicity.
It's the customer traffic, I guess.
Thanks
for clarifying, though.
I have nothing to do with their ethnicity. It has everything to do with I can see the kitchen in the back, and I go like this. Ooh!
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with that.
Good. Very good. Thanks for clarifying. Definitely don't want to make anyone feel.
Pastor Al, I want to mention that when you move your phone, we do hear some noises. So if you get muted, it's only because of that, and you'll be able to unmute yourself. But I just
loud.
Yeah, sometimes yeah.
No problem.
Yeah. Same goes for anybody. We can be muted at any time. You've been warned.
No problem.
Yeah.
How is everybody?
We're doing good.
Talking Chinese food or the lack
Cool.
of. Yeah.
All
Yep.
right. I'm feeling good to get started now.
All right.
Yeah, we got some people tuning in.
Okay, cool. So I'll share screen.
Woo, here we go.
Thank you for trusting me to share my screen.
I don't know, some of those tabs, Christina. No.
Yes. All right, so I'll move this over here, and I kind of made my little slides. I moved them over while we were waiting. Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you guys for joining tonight. I wanted to explore a topic tonight, and I just want to point out that I don't have all the answers. I started kind of planning to address this topic, and a lot of it is just going to be to see what everyone thinks and some suggestions to help us find the answer in those situations. So tonight I wanted to talk about the duality of God, and I keep this. For anyone who doesn't know, I work in social work. I do community and economic development and housing, helping people overcome poverty, helping people to make wise financial decisions. And I actually keep this quote on my board with all of my to-do lists, so I can basically remind myself to keep exercising courage in my line of work. So we'll get back to this first, but I like seeing this, and it's a nice little reminder for myself. So I just want to share that with you, part of my work day. How do you This is the first time I've used
There you go. Your slides. Yep.
All right. So I wanted to talk about a time when someone surprised us. So please, everyone, share a time if you could think of when someone surprised you in a good way.
Ooh.
So, for example, you thought they were one way, and then they revealed something about themselves that changed your opinion for the better.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because you kind of know that you have those people, but it's sort of not
yeah
readily.
Well, I have one while people are kind of thinking. There was this difficult client at work, and he was yelling at our intake staff and raising his voice, and he needed help applying for this one program, and you had to do it online. That was the only way that you could apply. So the intake staff escalated it to me. Instead of them helping him apply, they wanted some extra support because he was so angry. So when I got on the phone with him, I was very warm and I invited him to come in so I could help him apply and told him what to bring with him. And when he came in, I looked at him and I said, "You look like you've had a rough day. Do you want some coffee?" And he said, "Sure." So I gave him coffee and I was helping him with the application, navigating through. And then we had some like donuts on the table from our prior staff meeting. So I was printing out something for his application. When I came back in the room, he was eating the donuts.
Oh,
And I
no.
started ragging on him. I said, "The second I leave the room, you grab a donut behind my back." And by that time, we had such a good rapport that he just couldn't stop laughing. And I told him, "You can have as many donuts as you want." And it ended up being a really positive experience, but I was nervous going into it because he had been so rude to the other people who work for us. So I didn't know what to expect, but I just decided that I was going to like overcompensate with kindness, and hopefully that would crack him, and it did. And it was nice to see, it was nice to see that he had that side of him too, a nice, friendly, jovial side.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of thought of someone. It was honestly. So it was I was a health and phys ed teacher for a few years, and there was a student that somebody had warned. Teachers do that. Like at the beginning of the year, they kind of look at their roster, and they kind of say, "Oh, who's in your class?" And they warned me about this one student, and I tried so hard not to like enter into classes like that, because I just imagine that I probably got the same sort of treatment, this one student came into class, and I just said, well, I'm going to try my best and not even think of that, but I was like hesitant, and it turned out to be one of the favorite students that I ever taught. Was just a really respectful person, at least with me. And we had a good teacher student relationship, and I was just pleasantly surprised with that, and just kind of reminded myself to try to not judge a book by its reputation. Yeah,
It's a great one. And I'm sure he thinks of you fondly too. Like the teachers didn't give him the time of day, but
well, he did egg my car the senior. No, I'm just kidding.
Out of love.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Anything on Facebook?
I'm letting it reload, so I'll just go while I get that because it had to recircle. I saw someone put a comment, but it didn't come right away.
Okay.
So repeat your question one more time, Christina.
Sure. Okay. Can you share a time when someone surprised you in a good way? Like you thought they were one way and they revealed something that changed your opinion for the better?
That's what I thought. That was the girl who is now my best friend, one of my closest people. I did not like her. She was a coworker of my husband's, and there's nothing wrong with her. There was nothing wrong. I just didn't like her, and it was a bad time in our life. And Mike was still recovering from being sick. He was still recovering from cancer. He was in remission, but less than a year at that time, and he was still very, very thin, and he overworked it sometimes. And the story goes that he was late for work, and I went to the apartment, and it looked like he was sleeping, but he wasn't sleeping. He had basically either passed out or he was nearly unconscious, like really unconscious. And I couldn't get him up, and because of the cancer and because of everything that had gone on, I gave up. And so I was just laying there next to him, kind of giving up. And she came over to check because she got off her shift, and she didn't know what had happened to him. She didn't see him, so she didn't even know I was there. And she got him up. She like really got him up, and kind of woke him up out of whatever he was. And I don't know what she did because I left the room, but I respected her so much for what she did. And it allowed me to see her. And I wrote her a thank you note. And that thank you note started us on our friendship, which now we're very close.
That's awesome. It's very cool.
Very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Night and day. Somebody that maybe you loathed, but you can't imagine your life without.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, let me know if anything comes
Oh,
up on
this
the
is
chat.
funny. So Kristen Brown
Uh-huh.
said she didn't think that Eric was the marrying kind. And laughed.
I guess the jury's still out on that right now.
Yeah. It's
Guess he passed the test.
that's the only comment right now.
That's awesome. Very cool. All right. So what I thought in my story was good was like that people can be both, My client can be the client that was yelling, but he could also be the client that was tender. Like Hector's student could be, somebody who's a rabble rouser, or they could be somebody who is really thoughtful and respectful. You can be both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So I wanted to go over this passage. It's where Jesus clears the temple courts. I love that Hector's like, yeah, good one.
Yeah.
My man. So I will read this. It's from John chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So here we see an example of Jesus being rebellious, disruptive, difficult to the powers that be, which allowed the people to occupy and the merchants to occupy the temple courts. So that's one example of the nature of Jesus. So here's another example. This is when Jesus was arrested. From Luke 22, verses 47 through 54. While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns." Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. So now we see a Jesus that is not completely submissive. We see that he's submitting to being arrested. We see that he is taking the opportunity to heal someone who has been injured in his name. And we see him saying his piece. So we have one example where he's flipping tables and one example where he's agreeing to be arrested and still challenging those who are in authority with his words. Oh, let's go backwards. All right. Okay. So I wanted to talk about, with these two examples, I wanted to talk about how can we know when is it the right time to speak up and when is it the right time to submit? And I wanted to hear from you guys on what you think. Like I said when we started this, I don't have all the answers, but this is something that I think is very important. And whenever there's any kind of conflict, I feel like we hear these two verses here. We see the dichotomy of one side saying, speak up, help, do something, and we see other sides saying respect authority, and this is no matter what the conflict is, these two sides come up. So how can we know when is the right time to speak up and when is the right time to submit?
I don't know, this is gonna sound maybe not very concrete, but I think using your intuition and judging the situation, kind of like the vibe that you can sense, maybe not from a person's words, but just from how on edge they might be about a particular subject, how defensive they might seem about something, and just kind of using your intuition, using wisdom, which wisdom isn't always a concrete yes or no, in terms of when to speak and when not to, but it's taking every situation into account and taking all the factors in every situation into account, whether they be visible or invisible or concrete or more subtle, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think also, kind of going with that, but we talked a little bit last week about just how having a relationship with someone kind of gives you a little more leeway or a little more ability, a passageway, if you will, to be able to speak into someone's life. Now, that's for like individual kind of issues that you have, and I think those are important, right? Those are definitely like conversations we need to be having as our church body or among other Christian family members that you have and stuff. But I think also when we start thinking like big picture stuff, I guess, like not local things, but like more global or in our community things, um you know i I think it is important to do what Lydia says, to kind of observe. And if we're seeing, Proverbs 31 talks about speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves and for the rights of those who are destitute. That takes recognizing those that can't speak for themselves, those that are silent, right? And that's hard because sometimes that means you gotta shut your mouth and notice those who can't speak for themselves, right? And then maybe encourage them to speak. That's a challenge we try to do all the time in youth, right? We're trying to make sure we get to hear from everybody. So and then seeing who's destitute, well, that takes kind of being able to notice, being aware, like Lyd was saying. So using that intuition, using that wisdom that God's given us to go and actually see beyond our walls, maybe.
Yeah.
One of the things that's helped us at times is seeing programs or shows that help us to become more aware of issues that people are going through, because we don't know what everybody's going through, right? So just kind of educating yourself and making yourself more aware is a good way to do it, or a good step maybe.
One of the things that strikes me about this issue is the importance of really two things: really being aware of yourself in a positive way, self-aware, and at the same time being confident about who you are and not speaking out of a sense of defensiveness and trying to prove something, but at the same time being self-aware. I find myself in situations where I'm caught between not wanting to speak out of anger and a selfish motive, and also not wanting to be silenced by my own cowardice and my own reluctance to get into conflict. in that situation, whether it be in the context of a person of authority or whether it's just for the sake of conflict. And those are really, really tough things. And hopefully, as people like myself grow in emotional intelligence, emotional and maturity, as well as spiritual maturity, those two areas of self continue to grow, and you can notice how to respond in a particular context. I don't necessarily think it's important to um, be correcting people just because they're wrong. Um, you have to be aware of, are you doing that for yourself? Are you doing that for them? Is it appropriate to do that to them if you're not in a position of authority? I think of situations where I'm in the midst of a clergy gathering and there's some wrong positions being espoused. And is it my place to speak up? And what is the value of that speaking? Is that rebellion against authority? Is that anger? Is that righteous indignation? I battle within myself to try and discern that. And so it's a very complicated issue. And just for the sake of righteousness, a lot of times I know what's right and wrong, what's true and what's not. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I have to really sift those things out within myself, and hopefully the moment isn't lost as I sort that out.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Like just one quick thing, because you mentioned the word righteousness, and like when I think of righteousness, it's not about necessarily being right, but it's about equity in the community and giving life to the community and harmony to the community and fairness. And those are all things that, proceed from love and not necessarily a desire to be right, but are looking out for the greater good of everybody and not just your need to for everyone to know that you're right about something. So
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I think that a really good takeaway is the self-reflection. What is the intention? What would I even be able to achieve? You know, um, and how would it be received? I think those are great things to consider. So Hector shared the part about speaking up. I'm going to share the part about respecting authority. This is from Romans 13, verses 1 and 2. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. So we have these two seemingly, I say seemingly because that's what it is at surface, these seemingly oppositional statements. But really what my main point is that everything is nuanced and there is a need for examining when is the right time to speak up and when is the right time to submit. And there's not a blanket position for every single situation. Every situation's different, and we have to consider all of these things. And like Al was saying, who we're talking to as well.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, even that passage you mentioned about Jesus driving out, the people in the marketplace. It's because they were exploiting those who were trying to go and offer a sacrifice by
Yeah,
charging more than what was the right way.
exactly.
In them doing that, they were keeping people from God.
Yes.
Um, So I mean, maybe that's something as a guide for us too, in terms of when to do some action when we see that there are the powers that be, whatever they might be, um, that are keeping people from connecting with God. Um, that's a time for action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that too, like Al was saying, like Jesus made the whip of cords to drive people out of the temple, not to like to whip them to hurt them, or at least it's not written. We would assume, but he did it so that he could get them away and make space for people who wanted to approach to make a sacrifice. It wasn't. The intent was not to hurt them and not to do harm. Similarly, with when he was arrested, you know somebody attacked the servant, and he had to, he healed the person. He chose to heal them because he didn't want to do harm, even if he had every right to stand up for himself and protect himself. He still chose not to, just for the well-being of that person who was helping arrest him. So that's awesome.
I still think that's a beautiful picture too, like a reminder that Jesus was not foreign to injustice and to suffering. Like, I mean,
No, absolutely.
like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he himself, proved it.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought. Oh, go ahead.
Something about that passage in Romans 13 that strikes me is that the whole issue of submission is such a hard issue, because deep within our fallenness there is that desire to be.
Ooh, Al, you just muted yourself.
Uh-oh, he doesn't know that.
That
Okay, we heard within us there's a desire to
think
be.
if someone is truly in a position of authority, whatever that arena is, whatever that sphere is, we should be, I think, always respectful and civil and humble, which is hard when you know you're right and that person is not really respectable. You know what I'm saying? There are
Yeah.
people with authority that are obviously wrong and obviously idiots. I mean,
Misguided?
it's hard to respect people that are not only wrong, but just not worthy of that respect. But I think that that's part of the challenge, to submit to governing authorities or whatever. And it's always been a struggle for me, because when I was younger, especially, I tended to be kind of smug, and I didn't realize it exactly. Sometimes people would call me out on it and say, "You're really haughty and smug and so forth." And I had to kind of check myself and say, "Okay, I am right, but that doesn't matter."
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a constant battle to be righteous and humble and submit properly.
Yeah.
Ideally, I would hope that there is a middle ground where, when we are respecting people, I think we owe it to them to, if they are wrong, to have a conversation with them about it, because sometimes just being silent isn't for their good in the end, and I would hope that, in as many situations as possible, we could feel comfortable going to them and having that conversation in love, but with a goal for truth and justice to be done,
Right. And I think that there's a difference between being assertive and arrogant and disrespectful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In that context, for the sake of righteousness, for the sake of somebody's well-being, other person's well-being, um, it's valuable to be assertive but not aggressive. If there's such a fine line between those two things, and especially when it comes to authority. Uh, my wife tells me all the time, I'm not good with authority.
Aw.
And so I have to constantly be on my guard for my flesh rising up and my pride and so forth.
Yeah.
It's hard because I'm always right. And no,
Amen.
Well, kind of like what Lydia was saying about, speaking up to people. I, maybe wish they would have done it in a more gentler way, but I'm happy that people said those things to you years ago, Al, because you're so not that person now, at least from what I see. So, had they never said anything, it may have never triggered that self-reflection that we're talking about, and you may not be the like humble, gentle person that we know you to be now.
I appreciate your grace.
Yeah. Oh no. All right. let me get to-
We got a comment, and Taryn says it's all about timing and compassion. So
Yeah.
it's true. Timing is the hardest element to me.
Yeah.
Timing in the sense of like kind of waiting for yeah, I mean,
Maybe
okay.
not in a group, maybe by the spot, like one-on-one.
Oh,
Or
okay.
maybe when they're not as mad. And
Yeah,
you can kind
yeah,
of calm down a bit.
yeah.
There have been a lot of times the thought that I had thought with someone having to speak up and not wanting to. I actually just thought about this earlier today. When I was a camp counselor, I had some kids. They were from inner city Philly, and we had some adults who had come with them, but they weren't camp counselors. And there was something that happened, and there was a little fight between a couple of the kids. And I said to her, I wanted to talk to her about it. She kind of got upset in front of the kids. And I said, well, I would love to talk to you, but not in front of all these kids. I said, I think you and I should go talk about this. And the minute I said it, she came out of her anger and was like, you know what, you're right. And we went to the side and figured it out. But if we had done it in front of the kids, even tried to say the same words, I think it would have come off so much more. We were both from so opposing points, but we weren't really opposing. We were just in a high stress situation.
Yeah, true. Absolutely. And she was able to view you as a partner rather than somebody who was out to get her. And that was great
Right.
to kind of be like, let's do this together separately. That's great.
I think if you're gonna wait on a situation, I think a key is being really careful about sometimes even when people aren't speaking, they can portray a certain attitude towards you if they're holding something in that they're not speaking, but you get the message from them. And I've been part of that. I've kept things in, and it's still been portrayed to people before. And sometimes I've felt like the receptor of that. And so, like, I don't know, to me, like, timing is important, but not to wait so long that it just like bubbles up inside you and you just can't, it's impossible to hold it in, without portraying it in some fashion, that's
Don't let the sun
verbal.
go down on your anger.
Right.
Kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
You miss your opportunity, and then it's like too late to bring it up, so you kind of just carry it with you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've definitely felt that before. Not from you, but in my life. In my life, Lydia was not involved.
It was another Lydia, but she spelled it with an I.
Yeah. The wrong way. I'm kidding.
Yeah, the wrong way.
Yeah.
The unrighteous way. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right. So here are some key things to consider. The first thing is, and well, number 1 and 2 really should always be, what does Scripture say about it, and am I willing to submit to it? Those are questions you have to ask yourself, because if you're not willing to submit to it, you're going to just comb through Scripture for something that confirms what you want to hear. So it's important to consider like what Scripture says about it totally, and it, think consciously, am I willing to submit it? And sometimes when I don't want to, I have to still think about it and say, yes, I will. And it's sometimes very difficult. And the second one, which could be first, either way, is pray for wisdom. Pray for the right words to say and to not come off like you're putting people in their place. Of course, you can't control how it's received. Everybody has their past experiences that they carry with them, and no matter how gently you say something, somebody could think that you're being too aggressive with them. But just pray for wisdom and to see, for the right words to say. The third one, whatever the issue is, what do the proponents say about it? People who are passionate about this issue, what do they say about it? And is it possible that any of their points are valid? And then it's also to examine, what do the opponents say about it? People who disagree with it, is it possible that their points are valid? Sometimes we, as much as we want to believe that we have a Christian worldview, and I would hope that we do, we're raised in a culture, we're raised in a melting pot. It is completely possible that some of our culture's ungodly values and our life experiences shape our beliefs. So by considering, number one, how does God feel about it? And number two, the people that believe various things, how do they feel? What do they think? If someone could get past their talking point and share with you why it is what they believe, you may find some common ground, and you may just differ in how you see that common ground to an end, how you implement the thing that you think is necessary. And I think that the common ground, a lot of compromise can be made there in a good way. And I think a lot of relationship building can happen there in a good way. I've had a lot of conversations with people where it seems like we disagree on so much, and then once we get into it, we're like, hey, look at all these things we agree on, and it's always really good. At least I think it's good, but who knows how they receive it. But I think it's important to consider alternate viewpoints after you look at what God says about it. What are all the views to take into consideration? And the most important part is to actually consider them. Number 5, what is the best way to do what is godly while respecting authority, right? We shouldn't be cursing at our leaders. We shouldn't be trying to physically attack anyone in authority. But we should seek to, pursue what God would want in that situation while still respecting authority. And if that's, a Jesus in the garden getting arrested situation where you could say your piece, but you're still submitting with the arrest in his situation, then we saw how godly that is when he decided to heal someone while they were arresting him, seeing beyond the current situation to the value that this man's ear had in his life. I think that's really important because sometimes we can be blinded by our own circumstances. And then 6, how can I win others over to a godly worldview? And this kind of reminds me of what Al was saying before about, is your intent to put someone in their place? Is your intent to show others up and be right? Or is your intent to present another viewpoint to hopefully win the person over? And different people are going to have different ways to win them over. Some people are, go make decisions more on their emotions. Some people make more the decisions based upon intellect and reason and fact. Everyone's different, and we can't expect people to play by our rules. And we also have to acknowledge that there may be loaded issues that people feel a certain way because they've had a certain experience, or someone they know and love has had a certain experience. So I think it's important that even if we disagree with people, to try to see the person as a person and to appreciate where they're coming from, rather than, passing them off as invaluable, because if you're a Christian, no one is invaluable. Everyone is extremely valuable. So that is what I had. If anyone wants to share anything, any additional key things to consider beyond these 6, please do, or anything to add, please share.
Well, I don't want to do too much speaking, but that
No,
first
you're
thought
fine.
really jumped out at me because like we talk about this from time to time on our walks with Nico, but just kind of recognizing our um, uh, American DNA to not want to submit and
Mm,
to we really value our freedoms like crazy. And so when we encounter scripture, we have to remind ourselves that we're not Americans encountering scripture, that we are broken people that need Jesus
mm,
encountering scripture, and there are going to be difficult things that will challenge you in the Bible. And if it wasn't that way, then you would be God, right? And he would
yeah.
just be like, just cheering you on, like, yeah, that's right. Why don't you tell me what to do, Hector? So, yeah.
Hmm. It's very good. Thanks for sharing that. You're not talking too much. It's fine.
No, you're
I
not.
asked a lot of questions, so.
I had a comment from Kristen. She says, I think previous experiences are definitely key for this type of problem because problem solving, because we have to be able to put ourselves in someone else's position, which
Mm.
I think is true.
Like empathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being
And
able to understand how they feel.
Yeah.
Yo, such good comments on Facebook.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's why
Is it-
I'm glad they pop up pretty much in time too. And I just, the thing about one thing I was going to say is, like, when you have this question, how can I win others over into a godly worldview? I think sometimes it is meeting them where they're at and showing them, like Christina, you were saying how you think you don't agree on things, but yet then you talk it out. And you're like, oh, look how many things we have in common. I have a few friends that I'll talk to them, and I won't use the word God or Jesus, but I will use the teachings of Jesus
Mhm.
and where my faith is based, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I agree with that. And then over
Mm.
time in a conversation, usually in a little bit of laughter, I'll be like, wait a minute, does that come from the Bible? And I'll be like, yes, it's from the Bible. And it's a kinder way of showing it to me, like a more graceful way, I guess. And it usually seems to have some impact. And that is something where I think if you can meet them where they are at and yet show them what you believe, a lot of times you can bring that godly worldview into their sight.
Mhm.
I think too, like with godly, I'm glad you used that because I this is hard for me to put in a way that doesn't sound heretical, but like
I'm gonna
Popcorn ready.
I just think it's when I think of like the Spirit of God, I think of a force that we can't harness. And sometimes we think as the church that we have the monopoly on God's Spirit and that we have the monopoly on God. But the truth of the matter is that God created everybody and not just Christians. And I think that his Spirit can often be residing with people that, might not subscribe, they might not be people who go to church all the time and do all the things that we do. And we need to kind of be open to the Spirit and not assume that, well, I have the Spirit, and so let me tell them how it is, rather than having that dialogue and seeking the presence of God, wherever God might be found. Hopefully that doesn't
Yeah.
sound too heretical.
No. I
Well,
think that.
I was thinking about something sort of along that line, but different. Um, as I think about Jesus, there's a little bit in me that's resisting the idea of there being this conflict within him between submission and authority. He was and always was ultimate authority and in authority over the people that he allowed to misuse him and misuse God's. And I think about the significance of that as a person often in authority as pastor. And I try not to hold authority as a pastor with great force. People see me as a person of authority, and I try and resist that perception. But there are times in which I need to, for their sake and the sake of justice and truth, I need to speak a correction. But generally, I need to do that in a gentle and humble and Christ-like way. And Jesus' choice of when to be authority, when to correct, when to be forceful, that's instructive. And I don't always do that very well. I don't generally do authority very well. And so I try to back off and be humble, but it doesn't always work very well, especially if it's a point at which I need to be authoritative and corrective and so forth. Discerning that, checking my pride, being humble, being loving, and being truthful is a tough balance to, as a parent, in any kind of authority situation. Yes, like Lydia says, we need to speak truth and justice at times when it's difficult. But I think the whole point of humility within truth, grace and truth. I mean, there is the balance. It's always been that Jesus was always true, always in authority, but he was gentle with people, even, well, maybe not even as he corrected them. Sometimes he was pretty straight at them, but generally speaking, his righteousness and grace shone through in his correction and in his authority. And anyhow, I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud and rambling along because I can relate to this a lot.
Yeah.
But
Again,
anyhow.
I think, I just want to clarify, like, by sharing the two sides of Jesus, I don't believe he was in conflict. I think that he knew what to do each time, but we're so often in conflict that it's good to examine, like, what decisions he made in each circumstance to see if we could learn from some of those things to use them ourselves. So just want to clarify, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying like Jesus didn't know what to do, but I wanted to.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that you were wrong in bringing up heresy, but you know.
But hey, we resolved a dispute. Check that out in love and kindness.
There you go.
I want to circle back to something that Lydia said about, hopefully not being heretical about like learning, seeing godly things in other people. And I personally don't think that's heretical because I think that like I am very close with a lot of atheists, and some of them are some of the most loving and kind people that I've ever known. And I think that that comes from just everyone being created in the image of God. Yeah. If you're created in the image of God, you're going to be able to experience the full, range of the things that God feels, but you're not going to maybe know the right way to direct them or have the right context to apply them. So I think that, there are people that, give their lives for others and do charity work and pursue justice. And maybe they're not doing it for the same reasons that we are doing it. Sometimes our goals will align and we can partner with them. But again, there's nuance. Some movements may have parts that you may disagree with because of your values. So we have to use wisdom to determine like how involved can I be with this movement if I don't agree with it completely, and what parts do I think are godly, and can I work to further without furthering the things that I think are ungodly. And that's difficult because we're never, we have so many views within the church that are so different. And we're all reading the same Bible. So, well, ESV or NIV, we're reading essentially the same Bible. but we still have different views. We're never going to have something that every single Christian can agree on, other than hopefully Jesus' death and resurrection. So I think that we sometimes need to figure out what we can unite on and where we can't unite, and get things done with what we can do together. So that's what I had to say. Anybody else?
I just, oh, sorry. I also don't want to, I want to make sure I'm not talking too much as well, but
No, you're fine.
everything we're talking about is just so interesting. So it's hard not to. Like I think what you said, yeah, what you were just speaking about, just brought to my mind when I was in college. You know, I grew up in the church, and one of the messages I always heard, you know, people say was like, well, you'll know that we're Christians by our love, right? And I believe, you know, I believe in that. But when I went to college and I studied abroad in Egypt, you know, there's like no Christians in Egypt. I mean, there are, but not very many. And I saw that the love that those people had, and it was a crisis of faith for me, because of the way I had been raised, which was that, well, you know, when you're a Christian, you're just so much more loving than everybody else. And like, I just think that's just such an important point that you bring up, you know, that because we're all created by God, like, you know, I truly believe that there are so many people out there that aren't Christian that are a lot more loving than I am. Hopefully I can take some wisdom from them and become more loving. Hopefully I can become more loving because of, you know, the presence of God in my life. But yeah, I don't know, like, it just kind of reminded me of that time, and just like not really knowing what to do with you know, a predominantly Muslim nation where those people, you know, just welcomed me like I was their daughter. And you know, sometimes in the church we see almost the opposite of that. Sometimes it can feel like that. So yeah.
And I think that humility is important. I think that sometimes the loudest Christian voices, you know, aren't the most loving. So I think when, you know, people who aren't believers can hear from us, like, wow, you're one of the most loving people I've ever met, you know, they could see that humility, and, you know, maybe they're more loving than us, and, you know, it makes it almost a little more difficult to show them why they need Jesus, but at least it'll show that humility to make them more open to seeing that you're somebody who, you know, is humble and can see them, rather than, you know, trying to protect yourself to save the face of Christianity, you know. Cool. Any other comments? Any other things to add to this key things to consider list?
You know, the levels of complication that we're talking about, many of you are in positions of ministry and leadership, as am I, and it's hard sometimes to discern when to correct, when to speak truth, and especially if you're thinking in terms of younger believers or younger people. You know, a lot of you work with the youth. Jesus didn't squash every disciple for every point, and I think there are times in which we need to figure out how to discern. Okay, I'll let that person live in wrong thinking because I can't just sit around and correct every point. You know what I'm saying? I think God allows us to grow into the truth, and that's something that sometimes we need to be assertive to correct for the sake of the honor and glory of God. And sometimes it's something that we need to say, okay, I'm not God and I'm not the Holy Spirit, and God will correct that.
Can't convict them.
Yeah, yep. And that's a tough thing in leadership and in ministry.
You're telling me. We work with the teens. You ever met a teenager that liked being corrected?
Oh, man.
I love you guys if you're watching.
I know, but somehow I feel more justified correcting young people than I do correcting older people. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
sometimes, as Lydia says, it's the older people that act more juvenile, more unrighteous, are in
Yeah,
need of correcting. So
Karen
leadership
says,
ministry.
Before pastor gets in trouble. No.
Yeah, no comment.
all right. Taryn says, as a parent, you have to pick your battles. I think as any type of leadership, you do have to pick your battle. I mean, you do have to
Yeah.
choose when to, like when you said, like with your scripture, when to speak and when not to speak and what to say. It's important to know. And that's, I think, something where sometimes it's about prayer and being like, okay, and trying to let the Lord lead instead of yourself, which sometimes we do, and sometimes we're humans and we're faltered and we don't, because I think we've all had those conversations. So
I
yeah,
think,
but definitely picking your battles is a good way of saying it to me.
I think also being creative about how we correct people. Like when I think of Jesus and all the stories he told, right? Like the parables, like that's such a creative way of correcting people in a way that doesn't directly attack them in their situation, but presents them with an analogous situation that they can
Wow.
see themselves in. And like with teenagers that might not work. Like I don't know. But I don't know, like that just, like I don't know, I just like the thought of kind of trying to, yeah, like just be creative about how we talk to people. I don't know.
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to point out was number 1 and number 6. Number 1, am I willing to submit to what Scripture says about it? And number 6, can I win others over to a godly worldview? If we have not done number 1, we cannot do number 6. If there's something that you have not submitted to God yet, you won't have that conviction of spirit enough to really truly win other people over. So it's important to examine what your view is on that area, because if you did win them over, it wouldn't be to a godly worldview if you haven't first checked that and made sure that you are, taking the right stance.
Amen.
Mm.
So, any other comments or things to add?
No, like, hey, doggy.
All right, guys. So, if that's everything, then I will close us in prayer. Okay. Will you pray with me? Lord, we thank you so much that you've given us complicated minds to use our intellect and a breadth of emotions to feel empathy, to feel conviction, to feel anger. And we know that sometimes our intellect and sometimes our emotions can lead us to ungodly thinking and ungodly actions. And we ask that you search our hearts and help us be able to self reflect on our beliefs and how we act toward others. And anything that we're participating in that isn't godly, to help us figure out to what extent we can involve ourselves in that, and to when we need to basically cut our losses and make sure that we're only pursuing you always. Um, Lord, I thank you for scripture. You've given us a beautiful array of examples and stories and history to be able to observe what your will is. And though sometimes it is very difficult, we thank you that you've given us community to work through these things together. And Lord, we pursue you, we want you, and we ask for you to make yourself known to us in all of these difficult interactions that we may have. And we thank you for the opportunity to be a part of a church in a country that we can do so freely. And we thank you that we have our brothers and sisters in Christ who walk with us. And though we may disagree, that we can come together in love and unity. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right. See ya,
Bye,
Facebook
everybody.
people.
Thank you, Christina.
Bye.
Great job.